Tēnā koutou. My name is Karl McGuirk, and it's great to present today to such a wide and diverse group of people who are keen to learn about university's response to generative AI in learning, teaching, and assessment. So I'm just going to share my screen, and hopefully everyone can see my title slide there. Yep, I see some thumbs up in the chat. That's great. Okay, awesome. So the presentation today is going to focus on the university's sort of response to generative AI in learning and teaching and assessment. So the ways in which we've been supporting staff and students through what has been quite a disruptive change to learning and teaching and assessment, but it's also provided some opportunities to support our staff and students to kind of navigate through this. So just a bit of introduction from myself. So lovely to meet you all. Karl McGuirk taku ingoa. I am Senior Digital Learning Lead in the Learning and Teaching Design team at the University of Auckland. So my role sits within the Education Office. As for myself, I'm an educator. I'm a former English language teacher. Most of my work at the moment focuses in learning technologies or technology-enhanced learning roles. And I do a lot of my current work within the scope of professional learning for teaching staff and staff capability building. So I do a lot of facilitation and training for staff around the effective use of digital tools to support teaching. I'm also a current Master of Education student, so I'm doing some research into how early adopter educators are navigating through the decisions when they want to use generative AI as part of their teaching approaches. And the photo of me there is from the ANZ AI and Higher Education Symposium at the University of Sydney earlier this year, where I talked about Kayako AI, which is a custom AI that we developed specifically for the AI 101 course, which I'll be touching on a little bit later on in today's presentation. And I think the next slide here is Jodie, so I'll give Jodie a chance to introduce herself as well.
Lovely. Kia ora everybody, ko Jodie Peterson toku ingoa. So currently I'm at the University of Auckland and I work in the Student and Scholarly Services area as Manager of Learning and Teaching Development, and also at the moment managing the Career Development and Employability Service. A little bit about me, just so you can get to know me a little. I am a former registered nurse and then went from there to primary school teaching, ended up becoming a neurodivergent student support specialist, and then came to the university. In my time at the university, I've worked in that neurodivergent space, also held a previous role as the Manager of Student Wellbeing, Diversity, Equity and Inclusion, but currently managing teams that are responsible for academic and career literacy development. So I'll pass back to Karl. This will all play into what I speak to later, but lovely to meet everybody.
Thanks, Jodie. Okay, so to start off with, I'm going to talk about supporting capability for teaching staff at the university, and then I'll talk a little bit about the ways in which university has sort of responded to this change. So as we're probably all well aware, generative AI has made a massive impact on our approaches to teaching and learning and assessment. And I think, from my read of what's happening across the sector, we're trying to balance the opportunity for learning, but also the risks that are involved to integrity of teaching and learning and assessment, as well as equity issues. And our response at the University of Auckland has been a sort of a collective response across multiple areas. And I think the fact that Jodie and I are here today talking to you from two very different service areas, but have very much a shared mission and a shared objective, kind of speaks to the fact that we are trying to do this through a very sort of managed, coordinated and strategic approach. And in terms of a representation of those opportunities and those risks, I quite like the way that the OECD Digital Education Outlook report, which was released earlier this year, has a really nice sort of framing of the fact that if a generative AI tool, a general purpose tool like ChatGPT, is used without any kind of pedagogical framing, it can not necessarily lead to any learning gains, can actually be quite detrimental for learning. However, in contrast, tools that are designed or used with an intentional pedagogical purpose tend to show sustained improvements in learning. I think it's quite a good representation of the risks, but also the benefits if we approach it through a pedagogical lens, which kind of leads into our response and also the development of the AI literacy resources that myself and Jodie were involved in creating. So just in terms of how the presentation will work today, so my section is going to focus on the staff capability focus. So that's the AI 101 literacy resource that I helped to create. And then it'll lead into Jodie's section, where she's going to talk about the AI Essentials resource that she helped develop for students. But as I mentioned, we work across two very different service areas of the university, but we do have a shared goal. We want to make sure that our users of AI, whether that's our teachers or our students, are using it responsibly, effectively, and ethically. And I just want to mention that the University Executive Committee, kind of set this all in motion in October, which is around about the time we started developing the AI 101 resource. Making sure that there's a sort of a high level, endorsement that we're going to adopt and embrace AI confidently, ethically in ways that maximize value and benefit for our people, our institution, and our world, which is a nice kind of sentiment. But then the question is, how does this actually work in practice? So what are the ways in which we're going to actually make sure that our staff and students feel confident and capable in the way that they use it to support learning and teaching and assessment? So as I mentioned, our presentations today are very much interconnected. So you'll probably see a lot of similarities in the ways in which I approach the development of the AI 101 resource and the ways in which Jodie and her team developed the AI Essentials resource, because we do see them as very two interconnected strands of development. And often there's a lot of parallels in terms of the messaging, and we want to make sure there's consistency across the messaging that we send to our staff and students around AI use. It's really important to us. So just want to kind of make clear that we do work quite closely with each other, and we want to make sure that there's consistency in terms of messaging there. In terms of how this all started, in that 2023-2024 period, there's a lot of interest, I think, from a lot of staff at the university for engaging with AI, but also a lot of uncertainty in terms of policy and strategy. So it was very disruptive. And some of the questions that emerged were things like, for staff and students, what am I allowed to use AI for? Where can it be useful? What does it mean for assessment design? What should you be telling your students? What are the instructions? What are the guidelines? And it was sort of very unstructured and fragmented in terms of the way the messaging was occurring. So obviously this pointed to a clear need for more structured, accessible and practical and a very strategic approach to the ways in which we were communicating to our staff and students about AI use, which led to the development of the AI in Education Action Plan. So this was led by Dr. Gail Morris, who's our Director of Learning and Teaching. So she led the creation of a AI in Education working group, where she engaged with academic stakeholders from across the university to basically create a set of guidelines and action areas for staff and students around the university in terms of our response to generative AI. So this is where we formalized the two-lane approach to assessment, which some of you may be familiar with, comes from the University of Sydney, from Danny Liu and Adam Bridgman. So we have adopted the two-lane approach this year. It's a year of transition for us into two-lane. We have kind of targeted next year, 2027, to be the date when we would expect all courses to have implemented the two-lane approach. But this year is very much in my role and what I do. A lot of our focus is supporting staff to help with that transition into the two-lane approach. So a lot of development and support and workshops that I've been involved with across faculties, thinking about what does this mean for assessment? How can you think about where you might want to put in lane 1 elements that are controlled, lane 2 elements where there's more sort of unrestricted use of AI. And the policy provides some structure, but not necessarily practice. So the key question seems to always be, what does it mean for me? How do we actually put this into practice? So this is where resources and opportunities for support are really important, because staff need guidelines and they need direction and they need sort of just that in-person opportunity to actually talk to people and figure out how can you navigate through what is very much a wicked problem, the ways in which AI is sort of affecting teaching and learning and assessment. So the action plan has 5 guiding principles. So transparency, equity, accountability, safety, and human-centered values. So those are sort of the guiding principles that sort of encompass the action plan. And in today's presentations, the first two areas of action are quite nicely aligned with, the presentations that Jodie and I will present to you today. So the first area of action was all about staff capability uplift and engagement. So we obviously want staff to feel confident and competent in the ways in which they would want to use AI for teaching and learning and assessment. So this led to the continued development of self-directed resources, which is the AI 101 course, and professional learning opportunities. So at the University of Auckland, we have a professional learning suite of self-paced resources. AI 101 is part of that. And a really important thing for me when it comes to supporting staff is just making sure they feel safe, supported. We allow them the opportunities to experiment and to play and to discover, opportunities to discuss, work with their colleagues. Sharing good practice is really important. And for the student capability and engagement, developing AI literacy, the AI Essentials resource that Jodie's been working on, and obviously clear guidance for AI use and assessment as part of that piece as well. So my first part of the presentation today is going to focus on the staff-facing uplift and professional learning, and then Jodie's going to focus on the student capability uplift and AI Essentials. So in terms of how we designed this resource, we started off with some very general design questions. So this was in the early stage, around about October 2024. So we asked ourselves, what do teaching staff need to know about AI? What do they need to be able to do? What do they need to feel confident about? And so we kind of used these to build some design principles. So we want to make sure that the resource that we create is accessible, it's flexible, it's practical, it's engaging. We wanted to incorporate AI elements into the resource so staff could go in, they could actually interact with AI in some way to actually help them build a bit of familiarity and confidence with using the tools. We wanted to make sure it was scaffolded, so it would start with a very basic foundational introductory module, then it would build up towards sort of more contextual and sort of focused areas in terms of AI for learning and teaching. And obviously, it's really important to us that any messages that we send are ethically grounded. So we want to make sure we're telling staff the right things. And some of the inputs that we received to help develop the resource. So obviously, we did some trial run workshops with staff. We collected some feedback from them on what they thought about the initial stages of the resource, which was really useful. Plenty of workshops. So it's a self-paced resource, but we do offer in-person synchronous versions of this resource that staff could come and enroll in, and that's also really useful for us to help actually refine and update the resource as necessary. We looked at some sector frameworks. So UNESCO's got a really great set of documents. There's a UNESCO AI competency framework for teachers, as well as a UNESCO AI competency framework for students, which we use to help build the resource. EDUCAUSE also has really good AI literacy guidelines that we use to help to build the resource as well. And we also looked at some other external models. So looked at what is happening outside the University of Auckland, what are other institutions doing, what could we look at and possibly emulate or adapt for our own context. So in terms of building the resource, so obviously the scope is very much aligned to the Education Action Plan. We set up a introductory module in Module 1, which is Introduction to AI, as an MVP. Then we went out and did some research because, I sit in a central learning and teaching unit, and my colleagues are all primarily learning designers, learning technologists, and we can probably assume what staff would like to see in this resource, but it was really important to us that we actually go out and talk to academics and find out what would you actually like to see in this resource. And also we did some structured interviews with them, asking them some targeted questions about their thoughts about AI, and we use those as resources to help build the course, but they also sit within the resource as videos of interviews that the staff can watch and get a sense of how some of their colleagues are responding to some of these questions and tensions, but also a review of the existing external resources that we looked at. And then we moved into a design approach, so a modular design following design templates, make sure that we're mapping the purpose of each particular module activities and the resources that are built into each module. Then we created the resource in Canvas, which is our learning management system at the university, as a self-paced resource. And that's in terms of consistency. All of our other professional learning resources that staff can access are also available through Canvas. So we want to make sure that it's sort of consistent in terms of its design and structure. We also integrated some third-party tools that the university has available. So we have H5P for interactive content. We've got Panopto for the video resources, the interviews with academic staff who participated in the process of developing the resource. We've got a Ed discussion forum, so staff can jump in and talk to each other outside of the course if they need to. And then, as I mentioned, we have some custom AI tools, and I'll talk a little bit about one of those a bit later on. In terms of review, making sure that there's input from our leadership on the development of the resource and how it was structured. Obviously, a resource like this needs quite a lot of iteration and development as these tools continue to evolve. So obviously, we need to make sure that we build in feedback loops before every module, before it gets published. And as I mentioned, constant iteration is kind of part of the course when it comes to any kind of AI resource. So when we run these workshops, we find out what are we doing well with the resource, what are the gaps, how can we improve them. Things like exit tickets, participant feedback is always shaping the development of this resource. Any resource that you create will need constant iteration. That's just the nature of how these things continue to develop and change quite rapidly. In terms of a timeline, so obviously in October 2024, we started the development of this resource within scope of our existing professional learning series for teachers. In November 2024 to January 25, we conducted the interviews with our academics. March 2025, we published the resource as initial MVP, as an intro to AI. In June, that was when the education plan was formally endorsed by University Senate and announced. And then August, we had 2 new additions to our AI family. We had Google Gemini and Notebook LM added to our enterprise suite for staff and for students, in addition to Microsoft Copilot. And then in September, we launched AI 101 Module 2, which was all about AI in different disciplinary contexts based on the interviews that we conducted with academic staff. And then we also published Module 3, which is all about AI in learning and teaching, which was also published. And in November 2025, the 2-lane approach assessment was fully endorsed by University Senate. And as I mentioned, full implementation of the 2-lane approach is expected at the university by 2027. And following on from the 2-lane approach, we published a new module in the resource, Module 4, which is all about AI for assessment, quite timely because it talks about the 2-lane approach and what it means for assessment design. And kind of onwards from there, it's just continued refinement and iteration. As I mentioned, it's really important that we offer opportunities for ongoing workshops for staff, obviously to engage in the resource and to give us some feedback. And then also supporting staff with a lot of assessment redesign in what is a year of transition, and it's going to require quite a bit of a paradigm shift into how our colleagues think about and approach assessment at the university. In terms of the course structure, so the first module is actually quite useful for not just teaching and learning staff, but actually staff across the institution have been engaging with Module 1. Because it's applicable to anyone that's just interested in AI and wants to learn how it works. So we talk about agentic AI, we talk about RAG, retrieval augmented generation. We give some examples of the enterprise tools that are available. So what does Microsoft Copilot mean for learning and teaching? What does Google Gemini mean? What does Notebook LM? How do the tools compare to each other? When might we use one for different purposes? We give some information about prompting, so some structured prompting information. We talk about the limitations and the risks that are associated with these tools, and we give some examples of common applications of AI tools in education. Then from Module 1, it kind of shifts into the specific learning and teaching focus. So AI in context is all about the interviews that we conducted with staff. So those are embedded in the resource as videos, but there's also snippets of quotes from the staff about their perspectives on AI in the different disciplinary contexts. So, and kind of framing this module is really about provocations and considerations. So why would you engage with AI? What are the considerations involved with this? What are some practical examples that we could share with staff about how some of our early adopter academics have been doing this, and what are some lessons and insights that they could share with their colleagues? And then, a lot of opportunities in that module for reflections and provocations to get people thinking about, okay, so I've learned a little bit what some other people at the university are doing. What does this mean for me and my practice? And then moving on from there, it's more kind of a direct application into Module 3. So again, building on the insights that we gained from the interviews that we conducted with academic staff, examples of AI in teaching practice, thinking about what does this mean for ethical AI use in teaching and learning, some more specific examples of AI content and prompts specifically around teaching and learning, and then a very kind of ambitiously named future-proof AI teaching, which I don't know if it's really possible, but it's just getting people to think about how could you stay connected and supported within your own community, your own faculty, your own teams, to think about some shared strategies for approaching AI use. So we point people towards, it's important to think about, it's not a space that you should be navigating alone. You should be really doing this collectively with your colleagues, within your faculty, open up conversations for discussion. Which moves also into module 4, which is part of that involves the 2-lane approach for assessment. So unpacking what that actually means for staff. What does lane 1 mean? What does lane 2 mean? And again, thinking back to the importance of having discussions with your colleagues, the whole of program approach, which is part of the assessment policies and procedures. So the 2-lane approach should be inclusive of a whole of program. So looking at an entire degree program, where would opportunities for lane 1 controlled assessment sit? Where would opportunities for lane 2 unrestricted AI use is more sort of endorsed in lane 2? And then also opportunities for AI to actually support design of assessment is included in module 4. So it is very much a sort of a staged and scaffolded approach in terms of how staff would progress through the resource. And it's very much a multimodal resource. So it's not just the self-paced Canvas course. As I mentioned, there's it kind of frames synchronous workshops that we run. So we base all of the content that we run for staff based on what's existing in the resource, and we point staff towards it to say, hey, anything that we covered today, it's in the AI 101, feel free to have a look. There's also prompt parlors. These are sort of open, safe spaces that we run for staff. We'll be to say, hey, just drop in, have a chat with us. Feel free to come in. Any experience, we don't say that you need to be an expert user. It's open for any staff who are just approaching this for the first time, just want to learn, just want to play around. That's a really important part of the support that we offer for staff. Obviously, there's the expert interviews that are in the course as well. People want to find out what some of their colleagues have been thinking about in terms of AI use. Building community. So in module 3, that's kind of an important part of what are the networks that are available within the university for you to feel like that you are safe and supported and you're not navigating this challenge alone. And there's also Kayako AI, which I'll talk a little bit about in a moment, which is a custom AI that we designed for helping people to create prompts for the different enterprise tools we have available. So for Copilot, for Gemini, and for Notebook LM. In terms of engagement in the resource, so the screenshot on the right-hand side of the slide there is from our 2025 retrospective piece on Teachable Digital, which is our central learning and teaching hub for staff at university. As you can see there, AI 101 was by far the most widely accessed resource in our professional learning suite last year, which is not really a surprise given how sort of much of a hot topic AI is for learning and teaching and assessment. Those other resources there are also part of our professional learning suite. So we've got resources on accessibility, assessment for learning, teaching 101 for new teaching staff, teaching for GTAs, our graduate teaching assistants, course design and reflecting on practice. And so we had 9,200 visits to that resource in last year. And at the moment in 2026, we're already up to 4,000 visits to that resource. So continues to be popular. We've also offered a self-paced enroll option in the course. So we have 172 staff enrolled in there at the moment as students. If they're enrolled in the course as students, they can engage in the synchronous ed discussion in the course. So it's an option if they want to engage in it. And there's also the workshops that we deliver associated with the resource. So we've run workshops for Intro to AI. Intro to AI is open to all staff at university to attend. It's not just for teaching staff. Modules 2 and 3 are more specifically focused for teaching staff. So AI in context and practice for learning and teaching. And then we've also run workshops on module 4, AI for assessment and the 2-lane approach and assessment redesign. But also importantly, part of that is the prompt parlor. So this is the safe space where we get people to come in and just chat and explore. And it's a very low stakes opportunity for just play and just see what's possible. And it's a safe space. We allow staff to come in and just share their questions and thoughts and even their concerns as part of that opportunity for learning. And then we've got Kayako AI. So Kayako AI is a Gemini gem. If you're not familiar with Gemini gems, they're essentially steerable AI agents that you can create in Google Gemini. We have enterprise access to Gemini at the University of Auckland, which means that you can create your own gem and you can give it instructions and you can share it with others. So in the AI101 resource, it's a AI co-designer. So it actually has a dialogic approach. It will ask them questions about themselves, their role, their context, their learners, and it will actually give them advice and guidance around which specific tool might be best if they're considering an AI prompt for a certain learning and teaching use case. And it's grounded in our institutional framework. So our Teachable framework, Taumata Teite, our vision, it's grounded in our signature pedagogical practices, universal design for learning, the graduate profile. And the nice thing about Kayako is it will often help kind of surface and give people an opportunity to actually engage with some of these institutional documentation resources, which can be quite difficult to locate if you don't know where to find them. But Kayako kind of helps you discover them through quite a natural dialogic approach to actually talking to an AI and actually finding out, oh, so I wanted to explore this. It aligns with this part of the institutional framework. So yeah, it's evolved quite a bit. It was initially just a sort of very simple prompt builder, but now it's developed into quite a useful pedagogical resource for our teaching staff. And the last thing I just want to point out is that we have kind of grouped together a lot of these resources onto Teachable Digital, which is our central learning and teaching website. We've got a new section on there specifically about AI in education, which includes information about the policy and the guidance for staff, including the two-lane approach to assessment, all the staff capability resources that I just mentioned. So AI101, existing professional learning opportunities. We're drawing in examples of practice from our colleagues across the university. So we're trying to collate a bank of assessment examples that staff can refer to for inspiration, for ideas about what they're doing in teaching and learning and assessment. And there's a link there to the student-facing guidance that Jodie will talk about a bit later on, and what are the available institutional tools that are available for staff and the support that's available to them. So yeah, and it's an ever-evolving space. We're going to just have to keep iterating and adding to it and building it. But obviously, it's really important to us that there's sort of a central space, a one-stop shop for all this information for staff to kind of find out where this information is. And yeah, I think that's the end of my section. And I just wanted to remind you that everything I'm talking about today is very much interconnected and linked to what Jodie will talk about. And it's really important that the work that we did, we worked quite closely with Jodie and her team with the development of the resource that she led for students. So I think at this point, I will stop sharing and I'll hand over to Jodie.
Thanks, Karl. I will just share my screen. Hopefully you can all see that. Lovely, good. I can see lots of thumbs up there, which is great. I think, again, I'll just reiterate what Karl has been saying, I think, about the close relationship that we have had in the development of the flip side of that staff development coin, which is the student development, and that especially in the AI space, it has been very important for us to have a very collaborative approach and be sharing what we're doing across, because it is a space where we need the messaging for our staff and our students to be the same, and for everybody to be in agreement about what that messaging is, so it's not confusing, any more confusing than it already is, for staff and students to be able to use AI. I'll just click on to the next slide. So as Karl mentioned, the university had developed a AI in Education action plan. And one of the key sort of positional statements that was made in that plan was that the university was committed to ensuring that graduates were well prepared for their future, including being responsible users of AI, and that they had the familiarity and capabilities to thrive in an era of AI. And that, I think that statement itself is something that has flowed over into all of these resources and all of the things that we've put in place to support students, but also to support staff to be able to support students to be competent and critical AI users. I think one of the things we get a lot is, everybody's already using it, so why think about these capabilities? Students are, natural technology users. They're just going and using it. And I think a lot of it for us is around that responsible use and critical thinking use being a really high priority in the graduate capabilities that we're wanting to develop in students. Again, as Karl mentioned in that action plan, one of those priority actions was to provide a self-directed resource for students via Canvas, our learning management system. And that is the task that I was tasked with early last year, is to have a project team that puts this resource together. Luckily for me, Karl and Karl's team had already been putting together the stuff, AI 101, had made some great connections and already done some early research there. And so they were actually able to provide to my team a bit of a starting point for getting going with this resource. So they had already explored, some of you may be aware that the University of Sydney, Danny Liu, had done a co-designed an AI resource for students on Canvas, and Karl had made a connection there and was able to share some of that information with us, as well as some student review of that University of Sydney resource and some recommendations about where we could start as a team. We also already had an identified list of experts that we could tap into, and because of the AI in Education action plan, there was quite a list in there of identified other resources, policies and considerations for us. So we were quite lucky in the sense that there was sort of this package of here's a starting point that was handed over to us. Quite a privileged place to be in when starting a project. So full credit to Karl for getting that started for us. I think once we started looking at that starting point is at my end with my team and saying, look, what is it that we're really wanting to achieve here? It became really quickly obvious to us that developing a resource about AI is for students is more complex than a lot of our other academic skills resources that we have. And that led us to develop this model that you see in front of you, which was really just us identifying all the things that we need to be thinking about when we are developing this resource to make sure that it is fit for purpose in terms of AI literacy, but also all the other things that it needs to align with in order to be appropriate advice for students and guidance for students about the use of AI in the University of Auckland environment, but also within the New Zealand context. So you'll see there that we've got sort of 5 areas, and one was the content. You might go, look, we did a resource and it's really around the content. So we had those AI guidance areas around benefits, risks, and using AI for academic skills. But again, there's a lot more to it. So there's alignment and compliance with the existing University of Auckland offerings, such as the staff AI resource, university policy and guidance and emerging guidance, New Zealand law and policy, and how these things apply in things like copyright and research, and also taking into consideration good learning design. The fact that we don't just have a graduate profile, a graduate user profile, but with AI, we also have these sort of beginner versus advanced AI user profiles and how we're going to meet students where they're at in terms of their AI literacy development. But also that added layer of needing to have more stakeholder engagement than just our students. So quite often we'll start with, what is the student voice about this? But it became really clear to us that there are things that, you could ask students about AI, but they might not necessarily know the things that they need to know about this. So for example, in the assessment space, not a lot of the information coming back from students said that they wanted to know about the 2-lane approach because they didn't necessarily know that was coming. So we needed more stakeholder engagement than just our students. We needed to know what was coming up. We needed to know, from our University of Auckland AI action plan team, we needed to know from faculty where they were at in some things and what they wanted students to hear. So a lot more of a complex environment than our usual academic skill development resource, but this framework definitely helped us and guided us to get it right. So once we had this in place, the next thing was who actually needs to be involved in order to get all of these things aligned. So we had, as you can see, a large number of people involved with this project and with reviewing what we were doing and inputting ideas and information into this resource. So we didn't just have the AI and Education Action Group, we also had expert consultation. We had advisors from within my team and from Karl's team involved. We had professional staff from our Academic Quality Office and our School of Graduate Studies team and people from across the university that were contributing to expert advice or feedback to this process, as well as all the documentation that was available for us. I might have said this a few times already, but that stakeholder engagement piece was very, very important. So once we knew who needed to be involved, we established some structures around how and when we would involve them. So, our process for creating resources was very similar actually to the approach that Karl takes and is just a common approach to developing resources. Which is around that research, creating a structure, drafting content, building it and seeking and having feedback loops throughout that period of time. What we also built into our process with this was having, subject matter experts in that research phase and checking our content to make sure that it aligned with expertise. We utilised our University of Auckland student consultative group to give feedback at different stages. We had professional staff panels, we had faculty staff panels, and within that, at all these parts of the process, we were engaging with especially the professional staff panels and the faculty staff panels. So we would, we came up with a draft structure and took it to the panels and said, what do you think? Is this going to fit your need as well as the students' need? We took the drafted content and I have to say those panels were very, very interesting and very glad that we did that because it quickly became evident to us through seeking all that feedback that, in creating this finished sort of minimum viable product that we were aiming for, for me personally, I'm always aiming for what is the gold standard. And I think through this, it became evident that we were really going for what is the least problematic resource that we could put out there so that staff felt comfortable talking about it with their students and sharing it with their students because it wasn't saying anything that was out of line with what they were doing in the classroom, but also bearing in mind that there were things that were coming in the future that weren't in place yet in the classrooms and with our academics. So in very, very interesting space to navigate, but very glad that we did that. We did manage to produce our MVP and get that out and ready between May last year and October last year, so quite a short time frame to produce that. But yeah, I think we did reach the goal of developing the least problematic resource and maybe even a resource that is actually really quite helpful for students because when we did our student UX testing and feedback after launch, so our latest round of testing, students responded really positively to the resource, and we've had a lot of feedback that it's been really helpful, not just for our students, but actually some of our staff as well have said that it's been very helpful for them to understand what the students are being told. With all of this, so we've got our process, we've got our structure, this is all really great. I just wanted to share a little bit more about what went into the actual content creation. As I say, it's been quite a complex and involved process, and I don't know if any of you know what a Miro board is, but basically it's an online board where you can use a lot of post-its and images and links to bring ideas together. And you can see, sort of see in this picture, it's a screen grab of the Miro board. we did have our little model in the centre, and all of our information gathered around that, and pulled that all together into a structure for the resource. The structure for the resources is based around know, think, and do. So being a student resource, we like to keep things as simple as possible. So we grouped all our information into, module 1, which is around what do we need to know about AI? What is it? How does it work? And also that guidance on how we use it at the university. Our second module was, we called that Think, which is around the critical thinking piece, critical considerations when using AI, assessing our AI outputs, data safety, legal and ethical use, and we also included some information around Māori data sovereignty in AI usage. And our last module was around doing, or how to use AI. So we had AI specific skills, for example, how to prompt, but also how we use AI to help us with academic skills and practical guidance there. The resource itself is completed. We also had some just little quick links, as you can see there, so students that wanted to pop in and out of the resource to literally just find out what can I do with AI in assessment or research, they can quickly find that, but also having that modular process for students who actually wanted to come in and do a bit of learning. So at the moment, since its launch in November, we've had about 14K views, which is great. And the most viewed pages, no surprises here, guidance on the use of AI at university, using AI for academic tasks, AI literacy skills, and wanting to know about the UOA provided tools. So good usage there. Since we completed the MVP, the minimum viable product, in November, we have launched it, done quite a lot of promotion for it, but we are also continuing to update pages for emerging student guidance. So the 2-lane approach, that's one where we worked quite closely with our academic quality teams to make sure we were producing accurate information about that. And the university has just released their AI in research guidelines, and so working with the manager of the School of Graduate Studies to have correct information about that as well. As I said, we've also done some more UX testing with positive response, and we're shifting now into scoping workshops and developing workshops to provide to students as well. Next steps for us. Uplift of existing content. I actually had a professional and academic staff panel just last week on the content that we're wanting to improve in that space. We're scoping and drafting new content, drafting our workshops, embedding the information about our course into academic courses, and starting to look at what does long-term maintenance and BAU look like for this resource, where there is a lot of ongoing changes to keep abreast of and keep making sure that that is sitting in this real one-stop shop of information for students at the University of Auckland. So still an exciting and fast-paced space to be in. I don't think the resource will ever fully be complete as we continue to see what comes forward in this space over the next few years.